Hello and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast. Joining the podcast today, we welcome Nick Morgan from the Big Cat Group. Nick, thanks for joining the podcast.
Hello, you're right.
Absolutely fantastic, yeah. And by the joy of technology, today's podcast linking the two of us together from two very different locations in the country. I presume you're in HQ, are you Big Cat HQ at the moment?
I am in Brick Lane, yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Before we kick off today's episode properly, and we're going to be looking at brand event trends. Nick, first of all, tell us exactly what your job role is and what the company does for people who haven't heard of you before.
Yeah, so Big Cat Group's a holding company, but the agency that I'm talking about today is the Fair. We are the Fair, and they are a full-service production agency in health and safety, and we generally look after events of all sorts of different forms in excess of 5,000 people. You know, we don't do any of the sort of corporate market. It's all external, generally outside. And last year and this year we're doing about 60 to 100 different events across the country and across Europe more often these days.
And moving on to today's subject, many of those events that you will have worked on from when the company started and your experience will involve working alongside brands who want to be associated with a particular type of event in order to gain more exposure, increase the sales. It's all about business. But more and more we're seeing a move to brands actually wanting to host their own standalone events. Tell us a little bit more about that particular move and what we're seeing in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I can only go on our own experience, but yeah, we're seeing consistently, you know, brands have been involved for some time in terms of involved with events from a brand partnership point of view or a sponsorship point of view, and I think there has been often questions raised about ROI and how they can effectively track that ROI. It's slightly different on, say, pouring right deals, you know, so the big brewers out there or big portfolio brand holders where they get an instant return on investment, which is straight to bar sales, and they've got exclusive rights to that particular drink, then, you know, that's more easily quantifiable. Whereas big brands coming into festivals, sometimes it's a challenge to it is a challenge to, you know, how they directly correlate that sort of investment into sales. So yeah, so that's what's been happening. And I think we've seen more and more briefs where brands are coming to market now effectively to potentially own that space, you know, curate their own communities and then them almost act as a promoter, or they'll go out to market and get an agency to help drive footfall and sales. So, you know, this is driven from years ago where, you know, Innocent had their own sort of festival which was free, and I think now it's more accepted that even brands can commercialize these events, and we're seeing it, you know, more and more in the sort of briefs that we're seeing come to us.
I'm guessing, and I suppose you'll have had some discussion with the brands at some point as to why they're perhaps feeling that they're not getting the ROI in terms of their relationship with certain events. Is some of that driven by the increased amount of media options that you've got, and there's so many different types of vertical strands of media that consumers can activate with a particular event, that it just becomes more and more difficult to actually justify the cost of the headline sponsorship of a festival, for example, and how you can actually track what that headline sponsorship is giving you against what you could do yourself through all these different vertical media strands now?
I think, yeah, there's more, obviously there's much more, you know, channels. You know, one of the reasons for sponsorship is, you know, getting directly into that audience, you know, within a confined space where you've got effectively a face-to-face audience, potentially for a weekend, you know, where you wouldn't in normal, you know, or traditional, so like outdoor media and billboards where, you know, the sort of dwell time, interaction time is seconds. Here, you know, the belief was and still is, I guess, in certain circles, that with festival sponsorship or large-scale event sponsorship, you know, you've got a much longer propensity to engage with those particular, you know, the target audience or the audience that's attending that event. However, you know, there are so many, you know, channels now where effectively, you know, millennials and people attending events, they all drop out through things like Twitter or any of their social channels, any sponsorship link fairly quickly, whereas during traditional times where there weren't those channels so readily available, they were engaged and immersed, whereas now there's this whole hybrid event taking place outside, so all the channels that they're seeding content, and the content needs to be good and credible. For me to see something on any of our social channels, we're endorsing it. You almost become an editor of your own social stream, don't you? And you're absolutely endorsing it, and everybody. It's just with festival movement. All of these new, smaller events are getting massive growth and attraction because people want to. It's a cool thing to say to their social network. Look, I've discovered the latest festival, only 5,000 people. It may be not deemed as cool to say, do you want to come to V Festival? Because it's well established within the market and seen as probably more mainstream.
There is definitely this trend amongst the, if we're using the festival industry as an example, there does seem to have been this trend and this movement in the last 3 or 4 years of smaller independent festivals, and almost like an element of cool that's crept in to go to 3 or 4 small festivals in the summer rather than that one big festival that everybody used to go to in the 90s. And again, is that movement amongst the smaller festivals another driving factor in the experience you've had of working with brands who've approached you and perhaps said, look, we want to do something fairly small scale, but ultimately that's under our own umbrella?
Yeah, I think, so it's like, anyone within sort of early adopter brands, who are trying to lead the industry, that, they do want to be associated with those smaller festivals. Obviously, in return, some festivals deem themselves to be, maybe they don't want to be brand focused, but then when the sort of monetary and commercials come into play, often smaller shows do need that support.
Reality.
So so that is something that is changing, but I think the important thing is for these smaller shows to to be engaged, and they want to see something like peripheral entertainment added, content added to the show. I don't think you can keep you can just be a sponsor and just say be on a scrim on the main stage. That will, I think, generate zero engagement from both the audience and deliver no ROI. So I think that's something, delivering content into the show is really, really important.
Could we put into context for viewers and listeners of today's episode what type of thing we may be talking about? Are you able to bring to light any examples of brands who've successfully delivered their own event and what type of event that was, so that we can really sort of give good context to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so there's 2 sides. These are a couple of our clients. So we work for Hammerson, for example. So Hammerson are, I would say, pretty thought leaders in terms of placemaking, a term that's often used within property at the moment. So they're developing their own content. I mean, we're developing it on their behalf as a client over the course of the next 18 months. And it's trying to deliver almost seen as promoted shows, externally promoted shows within public realm and space that they co-own with the council or own exclusively.
Right.
So, for example, we're producing a light festival next week, and there's elements of commercialization being brought into that. And that has worked really successfully, because ultimately it's creating destination footfall, not just transient within Southampton, which is the area we're talking about. And therefore, it's also producing increased footfall and therefore sales within the F&B units that surround it, which is obviously on their rent roll. So, it does work for them commercially, and they're even, looking at like paid for content, people coming in and paying to attend these events. Even if it's a screening, you can do upgrade packages from, even selling headphones through to deck chairs. So they're, I wouldn't say they're necessarily at the forefront, but they really are looking from a property perspective. They're really leading the pack, and I think you'll see lots and lots of people, other property developers, looking at how they engage A, with the community, and B, to the wider audience, and trying to attract, outside their catchment areas in, which will lead to, more sales, because the high street, as everyone knows, is really, really hard to get people, with the internet, You know, people are sitting at home more and more. So that's a challenge there. And then just with brands, even another brand working with Sipsmith, so they're doing tours of festivals, and they're looking at how they truly engage and create an experience that isn't just about serving gin. You know, so, you know, I can't really speak about the ideas at the moment, but it is all centered around, you know, how do we, increase the dwell time and get more interaction, and they just want to build loyalty to the brand. You know, if you get a brand loyalist who then leaves, you know, that particular event, you know, coming back to a statistic after news, but, you know, they are almost 42% more likely to go on to make a, you know, a secondary or tertiary spend of that brand, you know, because they believe in it, they test heritage, provenance. You know, Sipsmith's got an amazing brand story to tell, you know, it's from, you know, and I think that's really important. You know, gone are the days back when I was younger where, you know, you'd never question brands on where it was manufactured, you know, the sort of factory conditions, whereas now, you know, people, yeah, so people really want to know about the brand, and they will engage, and they'll be really loyal if it's something they believe in. Whereas before, you know, people's propensity to change brand overnight was fairly common because they didn't know anything about it. There was no sort of brand heritage architecture around it.
When we talk about sort of brand heritage and brand loyalty among customers, if you look at some of the, you know, major clothing brands or certain types of clothing brand or drinks, often they are associated with a certain lifestyle, maybe even a certain type, genre of music that particular, you know, brand of clothing is associated with. And does it appear that some of those brands are actually wanting to actually bring that lifestyle that's associated with their brand actually to the fore and create that whole lifestyle ethos within a short period of time within an event?
So I think, you know, there was a really good article over the weekend in a magazine. This was about Nike, but just saying that almost, you know, the youth of today are starting to control or edit their own channels. So you might see that Nike has just done a big campaign of FK Twigs, and effectively she got to control all of the aspects from the photographer is her own photographer, you know, whereas years ago that would be dictated by the brand. You know, effectively you'd be called in, you get an endorsement fee, it would be their in-house photographer or what photographer they chose, you know, the clothing, do you know what I mean? So it was the brand dictating the look and feel, whereas the whole campaign's been almost edited by her and her team, from, you know, the look and feel of the shoot, you know, and almost they're leading and they're getting, you know, endorsements that way rather than the brand sort of dictating the audience, because, you know, they know their audience better than potentially the brand does. So you're seeing lots and lots of clever, I think lots of brands are really going to, you know, lead that, and you're going to see, you know, content being driven by the consumer rather than the brand themselves, because that gains better advocacy, I think.
How do you work from a content delivery point of view then, as an agency, when you're called in to work with a client, when they say to you, look, we want this engagement level as well, how many different levels are you having to actually work on now when it comes to delivering an event? How many do you then bring in separate social media experts? You bring in separate people to work on certain elements of it, or is that something now that as an organisation you have to be very aware of and have the capabilities to deal with collectively in-house?
So I think, you know, the really important thing is understanding what the KPIs, you know, which vary from brand to, you know, what are they trying to achieve? You know, and we have a specific sort of briefing sheet that we've developed, and, you know, it looks at things like what would be the perfect tweet, you know, things like that. What is it they're trying to achieve? Because sometimes it can just be footfall, it can be dwell time, it could be, you know, data capture in the most simplistic terms, sampling. I mean, that isn't something we engage with, but for those houses that do sampling, you know, again, they just want to give out a certain volume of samples on the, I would say, the vain hope that they will become brand ambassadors. But so yeah, it's really important up front, and we obsess about understanding from those brands what is it that they want to do. You know, what would success look like for all of us? And then from there you can start, you know, working up a brief, and often briefs will come into us, you know, and we will challenge those briefs as much as we can, because it's all around getting as much detail You know, if you get a paragraph, which rarely, fortunately for us, happens, but I have seen it, which just says, you know, we want to do a festival or we want to be doing some sort of, you know, live activation, you know, it's important to challenge them and make sure they understand, because sometimes it's been known that they don't. You know, it's coming up towards the end of the financial quarter, they've got some money from marketing and feel they need to do something and don't truly know what that could look like.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's really important, you know, understanding the brief. And then from there, you know, we would normally set two paths. One would be down the production route and one would be down the creative route. And in the middle somewhere there needs to be a marrying of obviously some realism brought from production generally up to creative, you know, to say, you know, these are the aspirations that we have, this is what we can truly deliver for that budget. And there's a happy medium and hopefully the client's involved in that conversation. It's really important to involve them throughout the whole process, we feel.
Just touching on the placemaking elements and this concept that's growing at the moment, has the shift in brand events themselves and how brands want to create their own events also led you to working in environments and in venues and in locations that are very, very new to you as well, as people source somewhere to actually have their event and more events are springing up? Are you having to be more creative in the venue sourcing side of things as well?
Yeah, I mean, our general routes are, you know, more outside, but, you know, I can definitely wholeheartedly say that is a massive challenge, you know, trying to convince any borough that you want to bring a large-scale event within their borough, you know, is a massive challenge. And, you know, what used to be a fairly simplistic licensing process, so, you know, premises license, etc., would lead, you know, that would be almost a consultation process. That is changing. You know, you almost need to do a pre-consultation, so for things like ward councillors, councillors themselves, that all happens before you can even apply to then put in a license. You know, and then you go through the license process, then you generally, in 90% of times or occasions, will go to a committee hearing. So that is really drawn out and is a nervous time for any promoter. You know, we can't guarantee, and it'll be the same for a brand. You know, we had it with a large-scale brand who was involved in Notting Hill Carnival last year. You know, that we had to look at the whole licensing again because, you know, some of the aspects of Carnival haven't had the best reputation, and we're trying to bring that element that, you know, is a safe environment. So, you know, there is a massive challenge, I think, in finding those unique venues. And then it's the same with indoor. You know, we do get briefs for large-scale events, but, you know, especially a lot of our work in London, you know, every empty warehouse that we try, you know, everyone's just trying to get, obviously, planning and then build as high a rise as they can to then retire in their chosen country. So it's a massive thing, and we get, you know, I get it daily from brands and roads saying, I've seen a warehouse, or do you know of any? And that market is moving so fast, it's really hard to lock down an unusual venue. You know, so quickly. We need to work over at Printworks. LW is our client there, you know, and they've found something I think really unique. You know, it used to be the Evening Standard Printworks, something like that. But that is a very unusual situation. You know, in 15 years, I've probably come across 5 or 6 venues like that, and it's the same in the regions. You know, we used to do a lot of work in Birmingham. The same is true there. You know, there's an area called Digbeth there, and again, there's mass regeneration happening there. So it's hard to get, and just to convert something like a warehouse, you know, everyone thinks you just go in it, you know, to convert it, you know, just under health and safety and licensing, there is a huge cost. It has never been used, you know, so it is a real challenge to find something unusual. But they are out there. We've got a team that just specialise in that daily.
When you mentioned that some of the pre-licensing meetings, so you would consult with ward councillors and borough councils before you even put together the licence application for an event, are you finding still that there's a disparity between authority to authority in terms of how accessible they are and how open they are to the idea of events coming in? Because going back to what you mentioned about the placemaking concept, when you're talking about bringing a lot of people into an area that has an impact then on local businesses, on food and beverage, on restaurants, on pubs, hotels, whatever it may be. Is there still a quite a broad range in terms of how well they're taking to this idea that it could be good for business to bring people into their particular area?
Yeah, there is, and you know, to my frustration, that led to me write many an email to many boroughs in London. So there is huge disparity. I mean, give an example for one event I'm trying to place at the moment. You know, I went to see it on Saturday, spoke to their councillor on Sunday, of which today we've put a licence in. That, you know, that's a 3-day process. Something in West London within a borough, I had to go to pre-consultation at 28 days, and then they wanted to go to another consultation. You know, so there's unwritten rules here. 60 days, at which point we gave up, and it's ridiculous. So there is, and people's understanding of economic impact. There is a massive negativity around just volume of people. You start talking 10, 20,000 people, war counts that there is a massive negativity without looking beyond, those huge benefits to events. Not only from local businesses, infrastructure, from,
raising the profile,
taxes. Yeah. And it's really ignored. And, the whole point of licensing, the change of premises licensing was to try and unify across the whole country the process that went through. The whole point of it is the consultation. However, now it's almost shooting ourselves in the foot, because we've put in pre-consultation, which basically flags to everybody, hey, we're about to do a license. So it obviously raises, and then in local communities they start writing templated letters to everyone, and it makes our job really, really hard. We can't engage with them. So obviously nobody generally wants to say, yeah, great, I'm really supportive of an event happening, unless they're from the industry. I've never heard many residents say, this is the best thing I've ever heard of, I can't wait. And we've spent an awful lot of investment of money and time in obviously trying to make them understand the impact and all of the parameters and conditions we've put in place, to make sure, we're not careless. This is our jobs and our promoters, livelihoods. So we don't just roll in on the day and decide to put on an event. There's a lot of effort, which is all around mitigating risk, and and it's not just duty of care for our own customers. It's all about obviously the local residents, local infrastructure, not affecting that, not putting over, weighting or emphasis on, say, local transport infrastructure, which is often forgotten. So yeah, I would like to see more unification, and I was hoping that was what the Premises Licence Act was doing, but I don't think that's the same. Same as CDM is differently interpreted across the country by various officers.
And it's interesting that you mentioned different London boroughs, and I know that you were very careful not to name specific boroughs, but that there is clearly a difference from one to the other. Yet you would hope perhaps that in somewhere like London, that at the very least, at least all the London boroughs are working off the same hymn sheet and the same processes. It's interesting again that's something that perhaps we need to explore in another episode of Borough Event Industry News. Is how much drive is there to actually unify the process amongst just the local authorities? Because whilst the people continue to talk about devolution and giving budgetary power to big cities like Manchester and Birmingham and everything, why are the London boroughs still not talking to each other or working together in terms of the licensing process for these events?
Yeah. I mean, an example is I had one borough commander ring me, and said I can't put it on email, but effectively I'll do everything in my power to ensure that you don't get a license. Which, and he can't put that in email, obviously, because technically you can't be ringing people making those sort of bold claims. So that is a mass frustration for me. And, I think unduly unfair without even, letting us speak or, have a voice. It's just driven on, I think, general, politics within that particular borough. So
let's look at the well, not that's a negative necessarily, but that's certainly one facet of the process of putting on these events. When we look at the actual creative side of things as well, how much more flexible are you now in today's world with the hardware and the technology that you've got at your disposal to be able to create wonderful, engaging, creative events, even on quite a small scale, using the means that you've got at your disposal nowadays? And when you look back, perhaps in the last 12 months, are there specific examples that spring to mind where you think that is an absolute benchmark? We're really proud of that one.
I mean, the work we're doing with Hammerson, because their sort of vision is, not to do what's classed as sort of regionally successful events. They're looking at, which is it's a bold move in my opinion, which is something I endorse. They're looking at world-class events, which does come with a budget. However, we're speaking to, we've got an art installation going into one of their venues, which will be a world first. That is groundbreaking for a developer to be thinking like that and understanding the economic impact that surrounds it, the sort of reach they'll get in terms of social channels and hopefully positive sentiment, but also marketing. It gives them a reason to go to market and drive destination footfall, to say not only because it's very hard to say as an example, say Westfield or any of the Hammerson portfolio, we're open this Saturday, the same shops are open, the same shops are trading. This is another reason to go back to your audience and say, that is true. However, this weekend we've got an international dance festival, or we've got, this world first, and people, I think, in the current day, more than ever, are really seeking out experiences and also immersive experience. They want to be involved. Events industry as a whole is, in my opinion, very buoyant, and people are looking for those unusual things and always, wanting to get involved, and search high and low. I mean, that's why these smaller events are so successful, because of the great reach of internet and search that you can now do. But people will spend hours trying to find something that's unusual that not necessarily any of their friend network would know about, and then they gain great sort of social status, don't they, by saying, I've discovered something before you, type of thing.
Absolutely. And I think when I reflect on it a little bit, the drive for more brand experiences and brands themselves taking on their own events, I think is also partly related to consumers' tastes becoming a little bit more sophisticated in the last few years. Food, drink, the arts, how they choose to watch or engage with live entertainment. I think everybody's tastes have become that little bit more sophisticated, that people really now, rather than being told what to experience, are demanding certain experiences based on their tastes, which is why you see more food festivals cropping up, and you see people like Tom Kerridge launching his own, food and music festival down in Marlow this year. That's got to be as a result of people watching more food programs on TV and taking a greater interest in artisan food and high quality food. I don't know what your thoughts on that in terms of consumers' actual tastes and how that's reflected in it.
Well, I think they are consuming more and more media, because of the world of streaming and online. However, I think there's still a massive gap in then taking that experience, offline and into the live environment, and that's why food, and more specialist shows. Over the course of last week, I saw a new TV show launched, I think, called Wine Show. So that's much more specialist. 5-6 years ago, there would have been a much more overarching show, driven by a celebrity chef, and therefore covering different aspects, whether it be wine and then food. Whereas now, one of our clients, Drink Up, they do a whiskey week show, they do beer show, they do London Cocktail Week, and London Cocktail Week gets up to 70,000 people. So people are very individualised and very specific in what they want from that experience. And just if you look at cocktails and mixologists now, they've become celebrities in their own right. If they're aligned or associated with a very a good hotel that's got a good brand behind it and known for its own mixology, it's huge, and people are looking to follow them, and there's more and more propensity, I think, for people to go and take that offline, those sort of experiences offline, and there's nothing better than being in that shared environment, I think, and that's why there's longevity within, large events, brand events, festivals, because people want to have, that shared experience that will last, for a long time, forever. People often cite from their youth times where, if you would say to them, tell me about, one of your best experiences in life, it would be maybe a holiday or going to a festival with with your mates, seeing a particular band. It's not so exciting where you sat at home or gamed with one of your friends. I think those sort of experiences are quite short in terms of dwell time, whereas a festival is longer, and also the experience remains with you for a much longer time.
And bringing us, I suppose, to a nice conclusion and a loop back around as to why brands are really seeking to deliver their own events now, is that engagement. It's that creating a lasting memory that people will ultimately associate with that particular brand.
Yeah, and I think, and brands are being really clever about, the way they present themselves. I think you can't, you can't just say, yeah, this is a branded content piece by, say Vodafone as an example. I think you can't just throw the brand down people's throats. Going back to Sipsmith, they've just done, talking about cocktails, but they've just done an experience for over 6 weeks with Ham Yard Hotel in Soho, where hot gin cocktails. That was, the whole mixology piece with Ham Yard, and all the branding is really, really subtle. I think it just sits on some of their blankets. It's not just branded Sipsmith this, Sipsmith that, because consumers don't want to be just sold to. They're much more, they're much more savvy, and I think it's one of the instant knee-jerk reactions that turns potential consumers off, is the thought of them being sold to by a brand will immediately turn them away from that brand. They need to be, it's almost like nurturing or courting, it's a much slower development, and therefore when that sort of converts, I'd say, to be a brand loyalist or a converted individual, they stay with that brand a lot longer. And Sipsmith's got, I use an example, so we've just been working with them on some creative, but they're really building 5-6 year relationships with some of their consumers who really believe in it. They sell out towards the distillery because people get what they're about, and they've bought into their vision, and almost they're coming on the journey with that brand. Whereas, I said earlier in the interview, but years ago it was a very often instant sales, based on sort of advertising, and what came to forefront of mind, and the more money you pumped above the line would often link to sales because the channels are quite narrowed. That has changed. There's so many channels now. So
it absolutely has. Nick, we're going to need to wrap things up there, but I think that just one of the final things you said there in terms of consumers being more savvy, being more aware, they don't want to be sold to. That they will be happy to engage with a brand if they feel that they're being given an experience or something that's worthwhile engaging. I think is good advice to anybody out there looking to get into the marketplace, or if there are other organisers out there or people dipping their toe into that side of things. It's good advice for anybody. If you are watching today's podcast via eventindustrynews.co.uk or via one of its other video platforms, don't forget that you can hop over to iTunes and also listen to the audio version of the podcast and subscribe to that. For now, we should thank Nick Morgan from Big Cat Group and the Fair for joining today's podcast. Nick, thanks very much for coming on the line.
Oh, thanks, James.
And thanks very much to everybody for tuning in to the Event Industry News podcast. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.